Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to look at aggregate demand. Okay, the first thing that we did in the previous video, we looked at these four different elements that make up aggregate demand. So we've got consumption, consumer spending, we've got investment, that's capital investment from firms, we've got public sector spending, government expenditure, and we've got net exports. Now don't forget, net exports are made up of revenue from exports take away spending on imports. That's also known as our net trade balance in the current account of the balance of payments. Okay, now, so the first thing we're going to do, we're going to consider which factors are influencing the first of those four components. And we're going to look to begin with at consumption. Okay, so these are the factors that we want to consider: disposable income, interest rates, consumer confidence, welfare payments, the wealth effect, and the availability of credit. Credit is also another name for borrowing, or normally things like loans and mortgages from banks. So, first of all, let's try and think about what this means, disposable income. So, imagine that you receive a wage or a salary from a full-time job. During the month or during the year, you will have certain fixed costs that you spend and that you know you're going to spend, and you can plan for that spending. Disposable income is what you've got left after all of those planned expenditures. It's what you can spend on luxury goods. Okay, so think about it: the consumption of new cars, the consumption of foreign holidays, the consumption of luxury products like jewelry or leisure services or something along those lines. Okay, the level of disposable incomes in a country will have a direct impact on the level of consumption. So, if disposable incomes increase, that will mean that consumption will increase. If levels of disposable income fall, that means that consumption will fall. Okay, so if there's any indicator that you suspect that disposable income might increase, that will shift aggregate demand to the right, and vice versa. If you think that disposable incomes are likely to fall, that will mean that aggregate demand will shift to the left. Okay, and you should be able to draw a diagram to represent that. Secondly, interest rates. Now, an interest rate is very specific. It's set by a central bank, okay, and it is a base rate. It is a guide for all the other banks in that country to base the cost of borrowing and the reward for saving. So don't forget, there's two aspects. If you save money in a bank, the bank will pay you for saving that money in a bank. It's called an interest rate. If you borrow money from a bank, when you pay back that money, you don't just pay back what you've borrowed, but you also pay back the interest on that debt. Okay, so a very quick definition for you: interest rates are the cost of borrowing and the reward for savings. Okay, so let's think about that. We've got savings and we've got borrowing. So if the government or the central bank of a country increases the interest rate, what happens to the level of savings? So interest rates are higher. That is a greater incentive for people to save. Now, if they're saving money, they're not spending it, and therefore consumption will fall. If the interest rate increases, that means the cost of borrowing money will also increase. If the cost of borrowing increases, less people borrow, and therefore less people consume luxury items. Okay, so we have to consider, first of all, if the interest rate is increasing, that will have a direct impact on the amount of savings or borrowing. Okay, and in turn, the level of savings and the level of borrowing will have a direct impact on the level of consumption. Don't forget, always go through the steps. Every time you go through one of the steps, you're telling part of a story, and the examiner will recognise that logical train of thought. Next, consumer confidence. Very simple. Consumer confidence is high, people spend money. Consumer confidence is low, people save money. Okay? So if consumer confidence is high, that means aggregate demand shifts to the right because consumption increases. If consumer confidence is low, it means that aggregate demand shifts to the left because spending falls. People do not wish to spend their money, they want to save it just in case. Okay? Welfare payments. Welfare payments, basically, when somebody is registered as unemployed, the government will provide them with financial assistance. So, it's very basic. If welfare payments increase, then people that are unemployed will be able to spend more money on goods and services. So, if welfare payments for those people increases, that means that consumption will also increase. However, if the government reduces welfare payments, that means that those people will have less money available, less disposable income available, in order to spend on goods and services. Okay, so the government can also have a direct impact on consumption if they choose to pay their unemployed more or less. The wealth effect. Okay, now this is a concept that is a little bit intangible. Okay, so imagine most people own certain large assets. The biggest asset that people will own will be a property. Now, if they perceive that that property is increasing in value, they are effectively becoming wealthier. And that will give them the confidence to spend more money. If, however, there's a problem with the housing market or there's a housing bubble that bursts, the value of those properties falls, then you could find actually the wealth effect has the opposite impact. People don't feel as wealthy, and therefore they don't go out and spend money on consumer items. Again, it has a direct impact on whether aggregate demand shifts to the left or the right. Availability of credit. So, if I choose to go out and buy a new car, I may go to a bank, get a personal loan to do so. Depending on how strict that bank is in terms of giving out loans, will have a direct impact on whether I can or cannot afford to pay for that new asset. So in certain countries, credit is available quite freely, but in certain other countries, there are much more restrictions about who can get bank loans, for how much, and whether or not that credit is made freely available. Okay, often the government steps in, or the banking sector that will self-regulate in order to restrict the amount of access to credit for people. So if I want a credit card tomorrow, I go to the bank, I ask for a credit card. If they give it to me, then I've got 15,000 euros that I can go out and spend. Okay, so the availability of credit is also an important factor when it comes to consumption. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 reasons, 6 influences on this one factor, consumption. You don't always have to use all 6, you don't have to remember all 6, but what you do need to be able to do is tell a story about what might impact on consumption and therefore have a direct impact on aggregate demand. Okay, right, next video is going to be looking at investment and what influences the level of investment in terms of aggregate demand.